So I'll start. I'm Jonathan Richter, and I. The story, I guess, starts. Well, I grew up in Milwaukee and moved to Mississippi as a kid. My father is a Lutheran minister, but also a painter and an artist. He was an art teacher up in Milwaukee, so I grew up around him in his studio as a potter, and he also painted watercolor, kind of fun little underground paintings. Anyway, so I went to art school in Los Angeles and studied illustration and took an animation class, and after that, after school, I've been animating and doing visual effects. The work that you see here is a result of me moving to Nashville, and coincidentally, one of my childhood friends moved to Nashville as well, and we both started drinking and did together, and we to kind of fill something, this thing with just sitting and talking and drinking, I had to have something for my hands to do. So I'd just been kind of learning about mechanisms in life to help us do things that we don't do normally. So I invented a rule for our drinking sessions that for every, and we would do these at pubs and bars and restaurants. So the mechanism that I invented for this was for every pint that I consume, I have to create a small painting. And so I have these little acrylic paints that are that are no gels, so they're almost pure pigment, which is just wonderful because a couple of drops will get me through most of these. And so my time is limited, and as everybody knows, bars aren't lit very well. They're often lit with red and green flashing lights. So everything was limited. And I loved it, and they were very spontaneous. So I had to do them before my beer got warm, and we'd talk the whole time, and I really started enjoying the process of making these because conceptually, I was able to let some things spill out of subconscious, but also technically, I was able to experiment with composition, form, color, and this is kind of my playground for that stuff. So, so one after the other, night after night, we'd do this, and eventually, I had a stack of paintings that everybody had a different impression of. So, started talking to DKM, and he saw things in them and would comment, and I don't know how we fell into the process of him handing me handing these off to him, and him responding to them with text, but immediately it just was great because the paintings themselves are kind of a Rorschach test, because everybody sees something different. My intent conceptually with them is different from almost everybody else's, and everybody else is different from everybody else. So hearing his insight was just really great. So so then I hand them off to him, and then he does something.
Yeah. I guess that's my cue.
Yeah. The music made it work better.
And I usually speak much more coherently from notes. I think that's why I gravitated towards a profession as a writer, because I just don't make a whole lot of sense until I've actually sat down and forced myself to think through something. I remember coming across a quote, and I don't know who it was from. Maybe someone here does, but it was to the effect that the greatest invention in the history of art was the frame. Which at first just sounds kind of cutesy, but you start to think about it, and there's a lot of depth to the statement that that creating art is about choosing what part of experience, what part of existence, what part of reality, what part of imagination you're going to hold up and say, here's something you might want to look at, here's something you might not have seen, here's something you might want to think about. And that made me think about how seeing is very different from just looking. We're constantly taking in visual input, but the idea of actually seeing something or someone, something of the essence of what they are, is such a different process from merely looking. Seeing, I think, is a form of actual engagement with some facet of our world. It requires that we be present in a particular space, in a particular moment. And it requires, ultimately, that we enter into, on some level, a relationship with a person, with an object, with an event. And as I reflect on that, it makes me think of the phrase, "For him who has ears to hear, let him hear." That maybe that's sort of part of the same dynamic, is that the things are there. They're there for us to enter into relationship with. People are, truths are, but it's only when we truly hear something as opposed to just listening to something, or when we see something as opposed to just looking at something, that relationship actually begins to happen. Hearing and seeing, then, are perhaps not even possible until our posture is one of humility, and sometimes that willingness to park our own agenda at the door, at least temporarily, to be able to try to truly hear or see, beyond what our own spin would, or our own filters would have us see. And that doesn't mean that ultimately we have to agree with those things. So part of my part in this evolving collaborative project that we eventually called Subjects with Objects, I believe it has been for me an ongoing exercise in trying to see, in sitting with these pieces, and recognizing that sometimes the temptation is to try to force some phrase on them. For years, I did songwriting in Nashville as a lyricist. So I had a notebook full of lyric ideas, little lines. So many of them were ones that I thought, oh, that's such a great line. And I remember when Jonathan first invited me to try some sort of collaboration, we didn't know what it was going to be, that was the first place I went, was to my little book, and started looking through it and trying to say, oh, can this one fit with this? Can this one fit with this? And ultimately that felt forced. And I realized that's not the right approach. I need to live with each one of these as long as I need to try to find something that feels truer to what's going on in the painting itself. Seeing is not something, I'm trying to keep track of time here. Seeing is not something that comes naturally to me. My first inkling of that was when I was in a literature class, and the first book we were reading was Catch-22, and the professor was lecturing about the circular symbolism in the novel Catch-22. And I had been a reader all my life, just devoured novel after novel from the time I was 6 years old. But I was listening to this professor lecture, and I was thinking, that's crazy. No writer puts that kind of depth of symbolic layers of meaning all the way down in their novels. All along, I think my reading had been impoverished. I was merely looking at the surface of stories. My eyes had been unable to shift their focus and see what authors were really saying beyond that surface level. So I left that lecture shaking my head, but it planted a seed of doubt in me of, am I missing something here? And I began slowly to look at literature differently. A few years later, I was listening to a radio piece on it was on a classical music show, and they were talking about Benjamin Britten's Sinfonia de Requiem. The symphony had been commissioned by the Japanese government to mark the anniversary of the founding of the Japanese Empire. The narrator explained that when Britten presented this symphony to those who had commissioned it, that they rejected it. They rejected this symphony without words on the grounds that it was an anti-war, anti-imperialist statement. And I just sat in my driveway listening to the radio, and I was stunned. Because once again, it was this idea that there's this language that you could communicate through music without words, something that specific. And I'm completely unaware of this. I don't speak that language. I didn't even know it existed at that point. I had a similar experience with paintings through reading a Robertson Davies novel, where he talked about how to read a painting and the symbolism that artists would put into painting. So in each of these cases, I just felt the ground falling away under my feet in terms of my perceptions of the world around me. I don't know what the opposite of an epiphany is. I don't know if you would call it a depiphany. But in each of those moments, it was just realizing more and more that I was blind and deaf to so much of what was there to see and hear, and so much of the language that other people were communicating in. So trying to learn to see has been a slow and not easy process for me. The act of writing, as I alluded to before, is typically the only way I can make sense out of the jumble of my own perceptions of reality. Oftentimes someone will ask me what I think about something, and I'll honestly just have to say, I don't know. And until I sit down and start writing to sort my thoughts out, I don't know. All of that to say that seeing remains a challenge for me, but the discipline that's required of this collaborative project consistently moves me outside of my own head and into relationship with something external. And so it's been a good ongoing practice for me in that sense. When Richter started giving me these paintings, what I found was that some of them ideas would begin to emerge fairly quickly. Others I would have to live with for weeks, or in some cases even months, before I would arrive at the seed of an idea that would ultimately become the text that we would pair with it. I usually work with a yellow legal pad, and sometimes, more often than not, I'll fill up most of a page on a yellow legal pad with tiny writing, different lines, different possibilities, trying to chase down some idea that might be emerging from it. What I realized was that, another way of looking at what I was doing was I'm putting a second frame on the painting. Jonathan has used color and space and the composition to frame a certain image, and then I'm taking that image and trying to put this additional frame on it. And for me, something interesting that emerged from that process was that it wasn't a process where I could just impose something on the paintings, but the longer I would spend with one, and sometimes I would spend a couple hours at a time with some of them just looking at it, making notes, and as I would do that, connections would start to happen. Things would begin to emerge based on the expressions, based on the postures, based on the color, based on the composition, where it wasn't so specific as to say that any of the text is the only text that it could have been, but I would just sense the possible meanings narrowing down as these clues begin to jump out and things begin to become more and more obvious. To give an example of how that process works, I'm going to take one of the paintings that it's already been sold, so it's not here, but it's this one where you have this character who has a head that looks like the moon, and they're holding a couple of light bulbs. I don't know if you want to hold that up there. And what I'll read is the progression of lines that as I've tried to, I used the example a few days ago here when I was talking to someone, that for me, the process begins to feel like I'm sitting on a tree limb above a game trail, just waiting for the animal to come along. Okay, so here's the progression of lines for this one. And then suddenly, everything just went dark. And everyone just kept looking at me, and I got really self-conscious. It's hard not to compare yourself to the girls in the advertisements. So it was always like, yeah, they write poems about me, but when they actually see the real me, they run. They want me to be this luminous beauty, but all I can think about is this crater problem. Yes, I'm aware I've got craters. Are you aware you're stupid? And I was like, yeah, but for once, instead of being the one inspiring the poetry, I'd like to actually be the one getting kissed. Eventually, I gave up on the idea of ever being kissed and just made peace with the idea that I would always be the one setting the mood. I just feel better knowing I've got a backup. And ever since, I've been afraid of the dark. It's hard not to compare yourself to the moons you see in photographs. It's hard not to compare yourself to the Hubble images. Because, as it turns out, I don't have any of my own. Because, as it turns out, what I thought was my light was only reflected from Mr. Flameface. Because, as it turns out, I don't have any light of my own. Because, as it turns out, I was only reflecting the light from somewhere else. And now they're telling me it was always reflective. And now they're telling me all I was ever doing was reflecting. Do you have any idea what it's like, after all those years, to find out the light wasn't your own? I gave and gave and gave, only to find out all I ever really did was reflect. The truth is, it felt like I was glowing, but now they tell me I was only reflecting. In my more honest moments, I suspect I always knew the light wasn't my own. There was always that little voice that said perhaps the light wasn't really my own. I claimed the light as my own, and eventually I believed it. But it was they who told me the light was my own. All I did was believe them. The danger of being worshipped is that you so easily begin to believe the light is your own. The biggest shock was learning that all my light was borrowed. I was afraid that if they ever knew my light was borrowed, they would stop writing poetry about me. It wasn't my fault that they believed the light was my own. In a sense, wasn't it my own light, though? Because I was the one reflecting it. After a while, you get tired of explaining it's not your own light, and you just start saying, yeah, thanks. Glad you enjoyed it. And I think that's the one we ended up with.
That's the one.
So then and this is sort of my favorite thing to share when we get to talk about this. There was a certain point after we had already gotten pretty far into the collaboration. I think we had done our first art show together. Maybe we were working on the second one. And Jonathan revealed something to me just casually. It just kind of dropped in conversation that changed my perspective on every one of these. And it's something that I write about in the afterwards, so I'll just read a little bit of that. Oh. And there goes my heart lost. Thank you. The great revelation is this. Richter humanizes his subjects, however unavoidable their grotesquerie, by painting them in the knowledge that he is capturing them on the day before their deaths. Ah, but you hadn't considered that possibility, had you? Perhaps you should go back now and ponder them again, for as you see them today, they will tomorrow no longer be. In Richter's fertile but frightening imagination, all of the creatures and people in this collection are glimpsed in that brief half-pause before the roller coaster makes its steep plummet. All of the thoughts, anxieties, ambitions, and musings herein portrayed take place then within a hand's breadth of that last flickering candle sputter, though few of the subjects seem to have any lucid notion that their imminent departure is drawing nigh. I perceive that this artistic construct of Richter's serves a deep purpose, though Richter himself might well be unaware. The point is that for the viewer, such omniscient knowledge humanizes the subjects who might otherwise be subject to our ridicule. Now we are made suddenly sympathetic, perhaps, if we are lucky, even empathetic, to their often degraded conditions. Understanding that they are within a day of their demise makes us feel more strongly that there is something unique and precious about each of them, something that will be forever lost with their passing. Whatever thwarted dreams, petty ambitions, selfish choices, defects of character, or failures of nerve they have fallen prey to, they are still, each at their heart, one of us. And they do us great service, much as gargoyles on cathedrals were once intended to do, studying us as we study them, serving as an antidote to our pride by reminding us that we too are sometimes comical, absurd, myopic, petty, deluded, manipulative, or simply wrong. And so it is, in the end, this solidarity among mortals, this knowledge of our own fallibility and our own approaching ends, that enables us to grieve for these painted subjects, to see that there was something of singular worth in each of these lives, something that might have been, or at least something that might have been otherwise. More exalted, perhaps, more heroic or truer, or more redeemed by love or choice than it was. And here the slope becomes slippery indeed, for once that solidarity of mortality is first established, there is not much to keep us then from seeing our own selves as but one more character in this collection.
Questions now? Go.
Well, so I have a brief conclusion. So with that knowledge, it really became even a more, I think, a more humble process for me of really trying to see the humanity, the human moment, the struggle, the battle that might be going on that's portrayed in these characters. So it's about trying to set myself aside and see them for who they are, and then once they've spoken their piece, to be able to say, along with the grandmother in Flannery O'Connor's short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, as she addresses the murderous misfit, why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children. And then sometimes adding, why, in fact, you're me. I came across a little story a few months ago about Oliver Hazard Perry, and how when he had just conquered the British in the Battle of Lake Erie, he sent a message to Major General William Henry Harrison that read, "Dear General, we have met the enemy and they are ours." Which immediately for me brought to mind Walt Kelly, who was very influential to me as a kid when I discovered his comic strips and his writing. He did the comic strip Pogo. But in the 1970s, he did a strip where he riffed on that statement and had the character Pogo say, "We have met the enemy and he is us." And so for me, what Subjects with Objects about, I think, is the movement from we have met the enemy and they are ours to we have met the enemy and he is us. And in the middle, that declaration that O'Connor's character makes, why, you're one of my own children. I think if the collaboration that we've done has any power to move people, I think it's because somehow a lot of it ends up existing in that space, in an invitation to see ourselves, an invitation to look at others differently. And I think that if it does that, at least it's my hope that there is sort of this implicit invitation in this collaboration to move from a pained pride to a more hopeful humility, and that's what keeps me excited about this project being an ongoing thing and continuing to spend time getting to know the new pieces that Richter creates. So.
Yeah.
So, you guys have time for
Sure.
questions?
Absolutely.
I'll get it started very quickly. One of the things that I like about this collection, Jonathan, is that there is, I guess, what I would maybe grasp to call an ethical suggestion. And a lot of the images, for instance, just one's close at hand. Here's big mouth, big teeth, eating. So suggests questions of consumption. Here you have a woman clutching her lapdogs, but you've chosen to put her in an evening gown with long gloves and her hair is done, which suggests money.
Right.
So, yeah, would you just speak to that, and is there a mission to?
Well, yeah, but probably a disappointing answer is that the conceptual part that you're speaking of comes probably from my love of the tactile and from abstraction and what I like in the world that I see. You know, for example, you know, the woman with the dogs and the gloves just makes me laugh because, you know, they're for the very reasons that you're talking about. But you know, but they swam out of what I was trying to do with, with representing color and representing form, and so the thoughts came very quickly. That painting in particular resolved very quickly from struggling with a composition and laying colors and paint down, and making sure that the orange complemented the blue, and needed to fix it with the white, and it's a person, and she's blonde, and it's a her, and those things, who she is, found their way as all at the same time. So probably the simplest way to put that, not that much thought wasn't put into it at the top of my head, but really my hand did that, and that's the thing that I love about about this process is, artists talk about their hand doing artwork as opposed to their brains doing it, and that's what this is. That's what I love about doing these. Is I'm surprised by about what that turned out to be, and it's the love of representing stuff with abstraction. So
we'll occasionally do like a pub night where we post it on the Facebook page, and people will show up, and it's just Jonathan will be painting, and it's a night of conversation and just having a good time. And one of the rules is that no one can talk about the painting until he's done with it. But if sitting there watching him do the process of the paintings, you really don't tend to know until up at the very end what's actually going to emerge. It's just been this process of layering, and as he describes it, those decisions are kind of made as the last thing, and the form really starts to get specific. So.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm trying to make sense of it. Obviously, I felt I looked at your work in the wrong context. I was seeking whimsical pairings of statement and image. And then as you explain your lives and your activities and what have you, and it's DK?
DKM.
DK, okay.
DKM.
I was about to say DYK, and that's
Much more lucrative.
I guess in the Flannery O'Connor is one of my favorite authors, but I get no humor from Flannery O'Connor, and now that I've sort of infused in my mind humor into your work, but now I must extract it.
No, please don't.
and take it in another way. But one is, I was telling Dave, the piece with the turkey vulture, I guess.
Oh, sure.
And speaking about being a swan, and if I can't be a swan, I'll eat it.
Yeah. You should probably look at him when you're saying that.
Well, y'all are co-conspirators. And I thought it was funny, but I thought it was sort of a sign of our times. I think we live in a world that wants to be something else. And if it can't be that something else, it will consume it. And I think looking at that's when okay, this is getting real for me. This is not Alice in Wonderland, fodder. This is something that takes on real life meanings. And so I guess I'm coming to a question here. Obviously, the work came first, the image came first, and then you interpret it in the context of a bar and conversation.
Well, the context actually exists really in the image, and even more specifically, the image as an object sitting in front of him on a table. Beyond that, I don't think we really approach it from a context of where it was painted. That's my problem. That's my device. That's how I get this job done.
And there's no conversation going on at the point that I'm taking one of the paintings and working with it. I'm just typically sitting by myself somewhere doing that process, and we're not interacting at that point. So we have our specific points in the overall process where we do interact a little bit, but it's mostly just at the end.
Yeah.
If I have, 2 or 3 or 4 lines that I can't decide between, I'll
Yeah.
run them past him and get his gut response to which one is jumping out to him.
This is the wonderful thing, though, that I like about this, is what you say is, oh, wow, that's really amazing that you got that. And, and this is the part where I talk about an exquisite corpse and the concept of an exquisite corpse, and I'll do it really quickly. It's, is anybody familiar with the concept? It's a game that was played. It was more of a parlor game, and the surrealists played it. What they would do is they'd fold a piece of paper into 3 parts, and on the first part, the first person would draw a head or some sort of a picture, and they'd continue 3 lines onto the next fold. They'd fold it over, and the next person would only have those 3 lines, and they'd continue that drawing, and then they'd do the same thing for the final. And at the end, they'd unfold it, and they get something completely collective, but very different from any of their intentions. So that's what I view this as, and it ends with you saying what you said. So, yeah.
But I would say that there is the current of humor that runs through it, but I'm trying to think if there are any here that I would view as just being funny without that being a way of trying to communicate something deeper. I think in most cases, like with the one you pointed out, your interpretation of it is exactly what my interpretation of it was and why I ended up with that. I mean, it's couched in a funny context, the way it's stated, but beneath that is the actual idea that you keyed in on. So
There was a blacklight poster in the 70s, and somehow we got it in our house, my brother or something. But it said, there were 2 vultures on a tree, and one says, "Patience my ass, I'm going down and kill me something." And so showing a proactive vulture as opposed to just waiting for something to die. And I guess I get a same sense of that. It's sort of a vulture out of character.
yeah.
Vulture not happy being a vulture. Well, I think they're wonderful. I'm also made a guy of your stature doing these little things and rather large hands. That must be quite a feat for you to paint so small.
No, it's actually beautiful because painting large, as anybody know who's attempted large paintings, it's not as spontaneous as doing something like this. So, yeah. Yes.
I'm thinking about the relationship between the image and the text, and also sort of your modes of production. And the only word that comes to mind for me as a divinity student is like ascesis, which is where we get the word like asceticism from. But I'm thinking that's the work that you're sort of doing on yourself to produce these works of art. And that for me, thinking of ascesis sort of opens up the relationship between the image and the text. Like the image is a work of art, and then the text becomes its own work of art. So like you both talked about rules. You talked about sort of you were going out to dinner, or you were you moved to Nashville and you had a friend, and you were going drinking, and then you set up a set of rules for yourself as you engage this. Or DKM, you said that for you it was about a process of seeing, and so you would sit with the image, you would try out different lines, you would try to chase down the meaning. And so for both of you, I was hearing like these processes of setting rules for yourself, and in that rule setting, that ascesis, that work on yourself, you're both producing works of art. And I'm just wondering if that resonates with you, or if that resonates with you, and then if maybe you could speak to, for me, what I think is maybe possibly the gulf that's opened or closed between the image that's a work of art and the text that's a work of art. I love the fact that you framed both of them. And so for me, in my eyes, like I see them as separate works of art. I know they come together, right, in the chasing down of the meaning, but they also seem to me really clearly like distinct and separate. So I'm wondering if that resonates with you, or if you feel comfortable speaking to that at all.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I like that. Yes, it does resonate. It does quite a bit. I mean, you know, yeah, we got to get there to the end of something with rules, and you know, people paid people for art. That's how art got done, and so yeah. So there's rules, but your turn.
I appreciate being a part of something where there is this tension in a good way that sort of exists between, you know, these two things. I think the paintings can stand alone in their own way. If we just had the text up here, I'm not sure what people would.
That would be great. Let's do that.
And we've joked about, you know, interchanging the text, putting their own captions on the pictures, and seeing what happened. But yeah, there is something that, one of the things that I think people have responded to over the few years that we've been doing this is really liking that double framing, that double filtering of an idea. That it hasn't just come through one imagination, but it's come through one and then been filtered through another and interpreted and, you know, given that second frame. And yeah, and in terms of the physicality of the framing, it took us quite a while to come up with this, to come up with a way to present the text.
Yeah. One of the options was like a little brass sort of plate that we had engraved, and we kind of drilled up into the frame, and it was presented almost like a trophy. And it just, yeah, it felt
just seemed
secondary.
cheap.
Well, that too, but so yeah, I like them as objects. I like the text where they arrive as objects.
You don't know the little text, too?
Yes, yeah. No, it's part of it.
I was always interested in, especially, you know, when, you know, these texts, you know, juxtaposed with the pictures, and I've always wondered, you know, with artists, this whole idea where it's not necessarily asking you to find the meaning in the art, as opposed to participating with the art, and in that participation there's sort of this meaning that is created. So I always wonder when you know, people look at the art and say, okay, what was he trying to mean, or what did he try to mean? I think about when you use the Exquisite Corpse exercise, where it's sort of this middle ground between a pure accident and sort of like, you know, like you said, the hand does the painting, so it's almost subconscious. So there's this somewhere in, you know, somewhere in between those two extremes, I guess, is sort of where art may come out of. So what I'm saying is, what I'm asking is, because I know you mentioned something about identification, like you were trying to find some sort of way to identify with, or empathize, or sympathize with the picture. To what is it possible that also there's just simply participate in what the picture is showing, and maybe there's not a meaning that comes out of it, but it's just that, you know, that participation that kind of gives you this feeling, and that's it.
Yeah.
You can't. I don't. I'm just asking, does that go into your thinking?
Well, everybody thinks something about everything almost, and you know, even our kids, they, you know, they've got opinions about everything as early on, and you know, who we are. Just so what I think about everything comes out of my hand, and yeah. So while I'm doing this, yeah, what I think about Vultures or whatever that is, and you know, women with you know, gauntlets or whatever, and yeah, it finds its way in there, whether it's really conscious or not. So, yeah, is that? Did I?
Yeah, no, well,
Yeah.
that's perfect, because it's kind of, because my idea is that there is not just one meaning, particularly an ethical meaning, but like you said, what you think about everything it goes into the painting, and so
Yeah.
there are hidden meanings, there are meanings that were unintended,
Yeah.
there are meanings that I guess can be created out of it, and I'm always interested in how, especially when you have text, it's a little bit easier to assume that you know the meaning, because the texts are a little more static.
Yeah. Most of the time he's wrong. No, but yeah. That whole thing with it being not something that's tangible up there is I'm solving problems with form and color and all that stuff, and but it's tangential with subject matter. I mean, it's always at top of mind, like Doug was saying. That's that other rule. It's the rule that let's treat these subjects with some real intent, or not even intent. What's the word? Just respect, I suppose. Yeah. So. Oh, sorry. Oh, we've got one in back.
I just wondered if you find yourselves making a larger narrative out of either the story or the painting. Does your brain go there?
I think the ones that I view as the, I don't know if the best is the right word, the ones I'm most satisfied with where they land are ones that at first glance and first reading don't seem to say too much, but then what it does say sort of suddenly works backwards in your mind, and there are certain dots that you immediately start going back and connecting and following this line back, and then you suddenly have this larger story. And those are ones that process happened for me as I was going through that narrowing down process, that brainstorming, that trying to figure out how I would interpret what was happening in the painting. So I would say in that way, yes. I don't know.
I think it'd be interesting to know, because I think in viewing them, you read it and you think, well, why did they say this? And you imagine reasons why you might say that, or why someone else might say it. It'd be kind of interesting to know what different people who are looking at it, the larger narrative that they create for it. Because you might look at one and create sort of a bigger narrative for it. It might be similar to the one I create, and it might be different, though. That'd be an interesting experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and part of the reason that, there are a couple of reasons that I chose to do the book under an anonymous sort of name, just using initials. One was just because we decided to, not in the pieces themselves, but in everything surround them, to adopt this kind of tongue-in-cheek, conspiratorial tone that is on when we have to write about the works. We kind of adopt that, but an actual significant reason for doing that was because in the first couple of shows that we did, the delight of it was just to kind of stand in the corner and watch people go through and read them, and they would go along, they would read this one, you would see them laugh, this one, you would see them kind of hit the person next to them and say, look at this one. And then they would get to one, and it was like they had just been sort of punched in the stomach a little bit. I mean, you would just see them kind of step back, and you knew that one had sort of somehow flown under, past some sort of emotional defense or whatever, and had registered significantly with them. But it would almost never be the same one with different people. you would see different people sort of find that piece for them that really resonated with them, and there was no consensus as far as that went on. Oh, these two are the ones that people are consistently saying. No, it was all across the board, and so I recognized, and we talked about this, that there was kind of a value in, I don't want to interrupt that process. I don't want to put myself and my personality and my, explanation for a piece between someone and that experience. So, so I made that decision to step back and kind of try to remain at least semi-anonymous in regards to this project, as a way of giving people a little more space to not have to, what they think of me color their interaction with the pieces. So.
Yeah, I think I have a hunch that people do bring their own narrative to all these things, partly because they all lined up. They all just feel like we're like non sequiturs. Is that what we call it? That they're so unrelated to each other that you find you just want to, the head goes there. I think. Oh, let's do it. Oh yeah, let's go. Let's go with New Blood. Yeah.
One of the things I just really appreciate about them is we talked about the framing of the text and the framing of the paintings. I think one of the things for me that I really like is even with the frames, there's still room for people. We talked about like framing something so that you can have a conversation about it, and I think we do that with language and we do it with art as well. But I think also there's a trick to framing something so you can talk about it, but leaving room for it to be open. And I feel like that's kind of the tension that exists here for me in the paintings and the written word. Both leave room for people to engage it. And I've seen the same thing as a proctor at the gallery with people engaging it, and I think that's tricky to do, and I just really have an appreciation for the time spent. It shows in the written word and in the paintings how you frame your composition, whether that's intuitive or I know sometimes it chooses you don't choose it, and the same with the written word.
So, yeah, that's cool. Thank you.
Two questions. I see you have quite a bit of diversity here, and if you can just talk a little bit about that, and you're choosing to explore the world literally of faces and universe, moon. And then secondly, was there ever a pairing that y'all just had an absolute disagreement, meaning versus image?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is boredom. You want to do something new. You want to constantly be experimenting with different things, and over the course of one night and maybe 5 pints of beer, I want to make sure it goes on, and I do new things. So yeah, that's the reason for subject matter and colors and hopefully everything being different and poking at new corners of my head. So, but part 2, what was that?
The disagreement.
Oh, no fist fights yet.
Yeah, I don't know that we've.
No, because I'm always delighted with what he even asked my opinions. If he's struggling, which one to decide upon, and he asked me, they're all awesome. So there's some that resonate with me, and that's why he asks. But no, it's always just so nice hearing what people think of the paintings, the writing, the combinations. It's always a revelation for me. So
Yeah, I can't remember one that we've really had a strong disagreement on. There have definitely been several where I leaned toward one option and you might have leaned toward another, but...
And I say, okay. So.
Thank you all again for coming, for the clock, and for John. We'll formally wrap here, but feel free to stay around if you care to. A lot of comment on the comments and the text. There's an opportunity for you to add your own over in this corner. Please do. And I want to just say thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
And Doug, for being here today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.